everyone to this session. It's called Investment Trends in Neurotech and Diagnostic. I'm James Cavuto from Neurotech Reports. And my co-moderator on this session is Diana Saraceni. Diana, do you want to give us a quick background on yourself?
Sure, thanks, James. I'm a co-founder and general partner at Panakès, a company active in life science investment. I have 20 plus years of venture capital experience investing in all sectors, all geography. And with Panakès, we invest in all segments of life science, anything including medical device, diagnostic, therapeutics, and digital health. Any stage from seed to pre-IPO round, and any ticket size from $500,000 to 5 or 6 and bigger round potentially. Thank you, James. I think we have a distinguished panel members here that now we will ask each one to introduce himself. We'll start maybe with Anna. Anna, do you want to start? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Diana and Jim. It's great to be with all of you. So my name is Anna Maiques. I'm the CEO and founder of Neuroelectrics. And I think that's the only reason why Jim invites me is because, I can show you, what we have developed, this technology that we have developed at Neuroelectrics is a non-invasive brain stimulator, can be used at home, and it can also record your brain waves. But we are really excited because we are now in pivotal trials with the FDA. We have a pivotal ongoing on epilepsy, injecting currents into the brain non-invasively to reduce seizures. And we also have a full at-home depression FDA pilot because of the pandemic to do depression therapy at home with this technology. So we are really excited. We hope to become the first transcranial current stimulation device approved in the United States and really allow a lot of patients to benefit at home of this kind of non-invasive neuromodulation techniques. And it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna. Maybe also again on the company side, Geoff K. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hello there. I'm Geoff Klass. I'm the CEO of Sense Neuro Diagnostics, located here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And here at Sense, we've developed technology to detect, measure, and monitor neurological disorder of the brain, also in real time and non-invasively. Our focus initially is on stroke and traumatic brain injury. And in that, we're developing, using the same technologies, devices that will be used in the field by emergency medical personnel to effectively triage stroke patients and TBI patients by telling them exactly what type of stroke they're suffering from so that they can make the right triage call with that individual. We will also be doing monitoring for those people that are susceptible to expanded brain bleeds in the hospital. And additionally, we'll be making a device for the military. And in the military, it's going to be used in the field. When a warfighter has been injured, they can put this device on that individual's head and it will immediately tell them whether they in fact have suffered from a traumatic brain injury. And then it will monitor their condition until they're evacuated and brought into a field hospital. We're currently in our clinical trials for the monitoring device that we have. And that trial is being run both in the US, Canada, and India. And we're very excited to get that going and look for finishing it up probably towards the end of this year, early next. And then we'll file for regulatory approval in the US, Canada, and India at the same time. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you. Thank you, Geoff K. Lloyd, maybe you want to go next? Leading Pixium. Go ahead.
Thanks, Anna. Sure. Thanks for having me on the panel. So I'm Lloyd Diamond. I'm the CEO of Pixium Vision. We're a public company listed on the Paris Euronext exchange. The company was founded in 2011, and our primary purpose, if I should say that, is to really use a neuromodulation technology to intervene in retinal degenerative disease. So our first technology, which actually is entering our final pivotal phase in Europe, is a retinal implant, which is targeting the initial indication of dry age-related macular degeneration. which today is really an unmet clinical need. The technology itself has actually been under development for many years now, and we entered into an agreement with Stanford University, who actually licensed the technology, at least the implant portion of the technology, to Pixium. We expect to have data readout from our pivotal study here in Europe sometime at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. And then we will immediately file the request for CE mark approval, at which point we would be the first retinal implant technology to have an on-label indication for dry AMD. In the US market, we are currently undergoing our feasibility work and in discussions with the FDA around our regulatory pathway there. Of course, it's a Class 3 implantable device, so it's not as straightforward as a Class 1 or 2, but we're very excited. The initial clinical results are actually quite promising. We've been able to show significant improvement in visual acuity in the patients we've implanted, and we expect that our pivotal study will be confirmatory for the work that's already been done. As far as my own personal experience, I have been in the medical device sector for over 25 years, both in US and in Europe, and have managed both private and public companies, and really excited to be part of the discussion and in this particular market segment of neurotechnology. Really exciting stuff being done. So thanks for having me.
Good, thank you, Lloyd. Now more on the investment side. Please, Daniel, do you want to go next with the introduction?
Hi, everybody. Daniel O'Mahony. I'm a partner with Seroba Life Sciences. We're a life science VC, headquarters in Dublin, Ireland. We have an office in Paris as well. We're currently investing from our third fund, which invests in both the pharma biotech space and in the medtech space. Of the investments that we've done to date with Fund 3, one was a company called Prexton, developing a small molecule drug for Parkinson's disease. That company was acquired by Ladenburg after 13 months. That was nice. So, we have familiarity certainly in terms of investing in the broad CNS space, and delighted to be on the panel here today with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And Imran, also on the investment side.
Absolutely. Great to see those who I haven't met before. Great to meet you guys, and great to see all the people I haven't seen in a while. But so Imran Eba, I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm a partner with the fund Action Potential Venture Capital, which is a corporate venture fund of GSK. And we invest in the space that we've called bioelectronic medicines, which effectively is neurotech, neuromodulation as well. But it's also been this idea of pushing the boundary on what that means by really looking at the concept of using energy as a therapeutic modality. So whether that be electric, which is where we focused on, but really, any sort of energy modality, ultrasound, acoustic, targeting the body to regulate neuronal or cellular function to treat a disease. That's been the focus. And so certainly companies that are going after epilepsy or retinal disorders as well, classic sort of drug markets as well, that if you can come in with easier to use with high quality scientific evidence backing them, devices, we think that the future you could have where these devices actually compete directly with drugs as opposed to being the option of last resort, as has often been the case with Neurotech. And we, as a corporate venture fund, despite that, we invest strictly for financial returns, no strategic rights, take board seats. Series A tends to be the sweet spot, but we break every rule that we make as far as all that stuff is concerned. But great to be on the panel as well.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Imran. And also on the investment banking side, Geoff C. I think it's your turn, and then we're done. Go ahead.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Deanna, for inviting me on the panel, and nice to see some of you again. So I'm Geoff Cohen. I'm a research analyst at Ladenburg Thalmann. Ladenburg Thalmann is now owned by Advisor Group, which has about 12,000 financial advisors and $500 billion assets under management. Ladenburg's largely the same. There's about half the business is healthcare. There's 5 healthcare analysts. As I like to joke with people, I say if it's in a petri dish, call the other 4. So I'm mostly focused on med tech, probably 2/3 med techy, cardiac, vascular, ortho, spine, skeletal, energy delivery. I'm big on energy delivery, and like Imran just pointed out, I would say not even match, but beat. So energy beats drugs across the board, earlier, later, and in between. So I'm looking at a lot of delivery technologies, STIM, DBS, ultrasound, imaging, et cetera, et cetera. So both for predictive and diagnostic analysis across the board. I look at I write research on public companies only. We cover about 30 companies here. I cover 30 companies here, and I'm happy to be here. I'm more of the commentator. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Geoff, and thanks, panelists. If I can introduce myself, I'm James Cavuto. I'm the editor and publisher of Neurotech Reports in San Francisco, California. We've been around covering the neurotechnology industry for 20 years now. Our flagship publication is the Neurotech Business Report newsletter. And some of the other products and services we offer the industry includes a database of neuromodulation products. We perform market research on the neuromodulation and bioelectronic medicine industries. We also produce several conferences. Many of you have participated in our Neurotech Leaders Forum or else the Bioelectronic Medicine Forum online this year, but we'll be returning to New York City next year and San Francisco in the fall. We also offer consulting services to the industry. So if you're a startup looking for help finding partners or funding, or if you're an existing firm looking to get some competitive intelligence, we can help you with that. And finally, we have a paperback and ebook publishing arm. So that's a little bit about myself. And I'm going to just really quickly go over some of the topics that we might be hitting on and some of the questions that we'll be throwing at panelists. This is just a quick look at some of the key headlines that we've covered in Neurotech Business Report in the last year, including technology issues, for instance, in the SCS market. Glial cell stimulation turns out to be perhaps a game changer in that market. Medtronic has bought a company. We've seen, we'll talk a little bit about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I won't go over all of these, but just kind of a smattering of some of the headlines that we've covered in Neurotech Business Report. I mentioned the pandemic. And of course, it had a serious impact on particularly the spinal cord stimulation market in 2020, in large part because many facilities considered spinal cord stimulation implants to be an elective procedure. And of course, you know, because of the pandemic, a lot of those procedures were put on hold. However, we're projecting, and this is from a new market study, a post-pandemic market study that we're releasing this month. We expect the market to be back to pretty close to 2019 levels this year, and then growing and continuing doubles with some double-digit growth in the years 2022 and beyond. We mentioned there's, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic had a negative impact on most of the market, but there were also some positive impacts. And this is an example of one company called ElectroCore that's conducting a trial using vagus nerve stimulation to alleviate respiratory systems. Also, several companies who market phrenic nerve stimulation systems to help wean patients off of ventilators. That proved to be valuable during the pandemic, but we expect that it will also help push sales even post-pandemic. Some other indirect impacts since many clinical trials got put on hold. The FDA made some concessions for doing telemedicine and for doing meetings that hopefully will continue. So it's not all bad news. We'll talk a little bit, and I know Diana has some questions for the investment participants on our panel, but this is just a quick snapshot of some of the VC funding activity in the neurotechnology space that's happened in the last year or so. And finally, I want to talk just a little bit about the SCS market, how it's matured and evolved over the years. This is kind of a quick summary of something we consider to be the significant paradigm shifts in the spinal cord stimulation market, starting, with Medtronic's original product back in the 60s, using tonic stimulation of the dorsal column, really was the dominant technology for many years and decades, until the mid 2000s, when Neuro came out with their high frequency stimulation, which produces paresthesia-free pain response and superior results. Neuro is one of the great successes in our industry. And a few years later, a company called Spinal Modulation came out with an interesting technology called DRG stimulation. So instead of stimulating the dorsal column directly, they are stimulating the dorsal roots, which delivers very precisely targeted therapy, particularly in the lower limbs, and superior results. Of course, that company has been acquired now originally by St. Jude and now part of Abbott. And then a few years later, an Australian company called Saluda Medical has introduced their closed loop stimulation technology, which modulates the therapy based on a biomarker, specifically a compound action potential. And in addition to producing superior results, it's also more efficient because they're only delivering the energy that's needed. And it's based on the pain response. And then finally, just recently, a company called Stimgenics, which has now been acquired by Medtronic, has introduced their differential targeted multiplex technology, which modulates both neuronal and glial cells. And as opposed to masking or treating the pain, the idea here is it may restore the pain network to its normal state. So very promising results have been reported, and that gives you a quick snapshot of some of the technology evolution in this space. And of course, in addition to spinal cord stimulation vendors, we have several vendors in the peripheral nerve stimulation. And of course, there's some overlap between the two, some promising startups besides the ones I mentioned, Saluda, for instance, Nalu Medical, active in both. There's a company called StimWave and a company called SPR that are active in the PNS, the peripheral nerve stimulation market. So that's a quick snapshot of some things that have been happening that we think are significant in the neurotech space. And with that, I'm going to now turn things over to Diana, who may have some questions that she wants to pose to some of our panelists. Diana?
Thank you. Thank you, James. Thank you for setting the scene. I think it's like several other sectors in life science. I think we're in some kind of exciting times. But I'm going to ask with my questions for maybe for the VC investor on the panel, Daniel and Imran. I mean, what are you currently scouting for in that area? What do you think are we obviously all are after those situations where those areas where that deserves more focus, where we can maybe obtain good deals at low valuation because other funds don't necessarily have seen the same. So what is a little bit out of the mainstream that you are after in the space? Is there anything in Neurotech and Diagnostic? Who want to start first?
Daniel, you want to go?
I suppose in terms.
Sorry, Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel.
In terms of areas which deserve more focus, obviously the CNS as an organ is quite complex, and there's obviously a range of, we know there's a range of diseases which have kind of severe impact on people's lives, from motor neuron disorder and so forth. I think areas of unmet need include trying to develop new technologies which on the one hand can actually allow for better delivery of large macromolecule drugs into the CNS itself, and they may be technologies perhaps to try and temporarily modulate the blood-brain barrier to allow for better drug delivery. I think there are opportunities for, obviously, there's a huge interest in neuromodulation, opportunities for implantable centers which can connect to each other and talk to each other and capture a range of different data for different diseases which are impacting different functions in the brain and which manifest themselves in a disease outcome. I think there are still opportunities and unmet needs in those sectors. And then obviously, with the growing interest in gene therapies for different diseases in the CNS, are there ways to combine better delivery, better devices for gene therapy applications, which potentially might open up this whole space as well? And for cancers in the brain, this is obviously, there are still large unmet clinical needs there. Are there better ways you can combine ablation with certain types of drugs to treat these kind of conditions as well? So, we see opportunities and unmet needs across different areas like that.
Daniel,
Thank
that's
you,
very
Dan.
comprehensive. Maybe
Yeah.
just to add to that, I would say, although I think that's a great answer, as I said in my intro, the focus we think is moving, neurotech remains, although it's a sizable market, the size comes from the fact that you can charge a fairly high price per patient. But if you're really wanting to offer this to a much larger group of patients, I think the idea is going after major disease areas with solid data and making devices that are less invasive. So I would say the two areas, I don't know if your question is, are they underserved or not getting the right attention? I think they're getting the right attention, but the two areas I think that we have real opportunity. One is going after classic drug markets with neurotech solutions and really being able to show why that's better. And I think number two is, which is the benefit of neurotech in general, which we have somewhat ignored, but Daniel just mentioned right now as well. Just the access to data that we have compared to drugs is phenomenal, right? But we do not really use that to its fullest extent. So I think companies that are, and there's a few now that are starting to explore this idea of exploiting more of the data that we can collect from patients to better understand those patients, I think is going to give neurotech a real leg up as well in the future.
Yeah, it was, the combined idea of getting into the mainstream and also onto a little bit the underserved areas, which I think you've mentioned. Is that, can I just now get the company on the company side involved? I mean, what is your understanding at the moment of the investment space? What's your experience in fundraising, and have you been able somehow to sort of leverage any angle of the pandemic, or is that have your companies been hit during it, or that question is for Anna and Geoff, and eventually Lloyd. Does anyone want to go first?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are a number of reasons, like Imran and Daniel are mentioning, is like drugs haven't been very successful on CNS for a long time, for example. And I think that, I mean, what is really exciting is that now the venture capital community, I think, is paying attention to CNS and in particular neurotech. And my company is based in Boston, and as Imran knows, is a very prominent place for biotech and drugs, but there is not a strong tradition of medtech and neuro, right? I think it's a difficult space. And most of you know me, and I've been raising capital, but one of the good things is, one sign that things are changing is that I raise in November, and I will make this public next week, $17.5 million of Series A from a prominent Boston investor who is a traditional bio investor in this domain. So this is a clear sign how the community and the investors are really changing gears. And one of the reasons why the investor is investing is because, he says, I wanted to invest in neuro for a long time. And, it's hard to get into a space in which you can understand. I think neurotech, has the potential with the data we can gather, with our technologies, to really make a change in neuro and in CNS. So I think that's on one side, it's a trend that I think it will continue. And I can see that some of my colleagues that are also raising capital, how the interest is really increasing. And I think the pandemic also helped us a lot. The fact that, for example, my TMS or electroshock therapy patients couldn't go to the hospital with the pandemic made the FDA extremely open to approve IDEs. During the pandemic, the psychiatrist from Boston in Harvard said, Anna, my patients cannot go right to the FDA. Let's design a trial, let's go. And in less than 30 days, the FDA responded positively. That's kind of historical that the FDA will go so fast and approve a non-invasive, non-approved technology to go home with depression patients. So I think it's a combination of the need that patients are having today and the promise of Neurotech that we still have to deliver. We still have to do the pivotal trials, build the science. And then the third part that I love is the technology. Like you've seen my CAB, that what it's really amazing is that we are using brain models to personalize therapy. For every patient we enroll at Boston Children's for epilepsy, we build, based on the MRI or the EEG, a 3D model of the brain. And we compute for every patient in the pivotal where the electrodes need to be placed, how much current to get a desired effect. So I think that Neurotech is also getting more sophisticated in terms of personalizing dosage, personalizing protocols for patients. And you have the potential to, for example, record EEG every time you deliver the therapy. I mean, what drug can have real-time electrophysiological feedback, right, on the effects of the drugs, So I think that that's really a lot of things we are going to learn from the brain by deploying these technologies and these therapies massively with Neurotech. So we just luck with the trials, but we are really excited. And I think I encourage all entrepreneurs to get into the area. I think we have to drive the new wave of therapies for the brain.
Anna, if I can ask a follow-up question, which will lead to a follow-up question I'd like to pose to the other panelists, but specifically to you, Anna. And by the way, congratulations on your Series A. That's exciting news. But Neuroelectrics, your firm, was really one of the pioneers of non-invasive brain stimulation and recording. Been in the field, despite your young age, you've been in the field for many years before some newer entrants. And now we're seeing a lot of new startups involved with non-invasive brain stimulation for various indications. And I'm wondering whether you see that as a positive or a negative, and how does Neuroelectrics react to this influx of new companies? And then the follow-up question I'd like to pose to the investors is, does a crowded marketplace, or a marketplace that's attracting new competitors, does that make you more interested or less interested in investing in that space? So Anna, why don't you take that question first?
I honestly think it's a good sign. I mean, even far from us, but the fact that Elon Musk invested in Neurotech really has drawn a lot of interest, right? He's showing these BCI videos with the monkeys. I mean, the ones that are in the field, we've seen these 1,000 times, right? But I think it's really good that, he's in this field and, making it like sexy and, drawing attention, because I think there is huge potential. I don't mind competition. I love it. And I think that there are so many diseases out there without solutions that I think we need an army of entrepreneurs and solutions. And I think that electrical is one, ultrasound, infrared. I mean, there's so many ways to attack the brain, right? And the only thing I would expect from the newcomers into the field is that they provide good science, they go through the regulatory path, they demonstrate, as drugs do, their efficacy and safety, and that they wouldn't take shortcuts, right? And be ethical about it. So I really love newcomers as far as they're built on science and they follow the process to protect patients, right? So I encourage new entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Anna. And would anyone else like to respond more generally to that question? Imran?
I would only agree with what Anna just said, the last comment about absolutely no worries. It's great to see competition, both from an investor and a company perspective. But like we as an industry really suffer when people cut corners. So I think good science, good data, when people focus and commit to that, I think we all collectively benefit.
Thanks. Anyone else? Okay. Diana, I think.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and maybe shift a little bit on also on the diagnostic part of our panel, because I mean, diagnostic is kind of on fire. We've seen several exits, IPOs, early stage IPOs, and a large increase in investment and M&A activity, and it's something that not most of us didn't necessarily expect, and is getting so much attention. So I mean, I'll ask the investors. I'll ask Daniel. Why do you think this is happening? What are the fundamentals? Is there any subsector you've seen that is attracting more attention and money? Is that an area of interest to you? You didn't really mention that in the hot areas you were after.
Sure.
In your question.
As a VC investor, we've been shy of diagnostics to date in funds 2 and funds 3. We did do a couple in our first fund. I think there's a couple of factors driving the renewed interest today. One, of course, is the power of non-genome sequencing and being able to capture large data like that from the human genome, and in turn using that information to help clinicians in terms of disease stratification, patient selection, drug therapy selection, and so forth. I think these are very, very powerful technologies which have a large role to play in the future. And, you know, people can get their DNA analyzed offline through various companies. You send it through the post and you can get information back yourself at home telling you you may be at risk of this or may be at risk of that. You know, January 2020, the public in general didn't know what PCR is. I think everybody in the world today knows what PCR is. So it's, you know, this is creating an interest among people as well. If we can do PCR for COVID, what else does it mean? But I think at the end of the day, for me, it's the power of genome sequence analysis, the rich data which comes from that, and how that in turn can be used in terms of therapy selection, patient treatment, and monitoring disease progression as well. And then with epigenomics on top of that, and RNA epigenetics on top of that, it makes it even more rich in terms of information, I believe.
Thank you, Daniel. And Geoff C, do you have any? I mean, you're covering an extensive equity research. Is that including some also diagnostic companies, right? Have you noticed any particular subsector where there's more interest, more financial investors' interest?
Yeah, so I would call it diagnostic and genomics. I kind of bucket the two together, but it's a very fertile TAM, right? As you know, it's 10 going to $20 billion as far as the addressable TAM, and maybe Imran could shed some light, but I would say the strategics continue to get hungrier, and they have a lot more competition now. So if I have something interesting, I could throw it into a SPAC or IPO fairly swiftly, and I could find the capital. I'm no longer a small company in need of the strategics, where it used to be a little bit different. But on drivers, I would say a few things. First of all, I would venture to guess that most people here have benefited from COVID, whatever that means as far as business, but it's been a largely benefit, and we've been isolated. So the world has changed a lot and is not going to flip right back in a heartbeat. So I would also say that as you know, Anna, there's a larger and larger need in neuropsych and DBS specific to depression, besides a handful of other ailments. So you know, we continue to think that that's going to draw a lot of investment. And we've been dealing with, on the drug side, it's always been treatment. So, you know, treatment's great, but, you know, why can't we just have more prediction and analysis, so we don't have to have that treatment, or we can avoid it, or we can find it earlier and we can get to it earlier. So I think a lot of these are themes that are driving a whole lot of investment in in monitoring, and more specifically in neuro, as well as a number of other spaces. The money's flocking. A lot of more companies are innovating. Folks have, a plethora of a balance sheet for which to do it on right now, where it used to be, many CEOs 2 and 5 years ago spent half their time trying to stay in business. And now, like, how wonderful if you have a year or two of cash and you can actually just work on a development plan as a company.
Yeah, and Geoff, one question for you, if I may add. I see all these companies in mental health, all these digital health, like apps, raising tremendous amount of money, right, on digital solutions and digital apps in software. So I see that all that streams money, the Neurotech company should be able to also capture part of that, right? Because if an app to monitor mental behavior or, to do CBT is raising that amount of money, why cannot Neurotech in diagnostics with a direct objective data into the brain, compete with that? So it's a question for the whole panel as well that made me think, why are not we competing enough with the digital health solutions in neuro, right?
Yeah, across the board, as far as the data collection and monitoring and net changes. I mean, there's people that have been seeing therapists and psychologists or psychiatrists for decades, and has anything changed? Are they better? Or can we actually show that, or a regression or progression of something would be far more beneficial, also to the payers as well.
Yeah, shall we stay on the public market and share this comment that public markets have been very open for even earlier than usual stage company. And also to medtech companies, and they've been very favorable, accepting new IPOs, in general, following up well. Also the medtech, most of the medtech companies. Lloyd, what's you're leading a public companies. What's your view on the financial markets? What has been the last year for you, and what do you expect for the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, Diana. So, I like this concept of the proverbial window we keep talking about. I think I mentioned earlier, I've been in the med tech world for 28 years or so. And it's only been over the last 12 months, I would say, where a pre-commercial med tech company could even imagine accessing the public markets. And I can tell you, it's no mystery that we ourselves, even at Pixium, had announced a potential merger transaction with our competitor in the US, which ultimately did not materialize, unfortunately. But in the process, there was, I think, one primary evidence that became crystal clear. And that is that around the table, as we were pitching the deal to US investors, there were a lot, not an insignificant amount of US investors, institutional investors, that actually were interested in participating in the investment to help with the transaction. And what I would say is to the tune of between $40 and $60 million. So that would have been unimaginable before. Now, maybe that being said, I say that optimistically because we had a transaction which didn't materialize, but we had investors around the table. What's even more interesting to me is some of these US investors are even willing to participate in funding, a small public company on the French markets, such as ours. I think so much money has been made in the sector, and investors need to put money to work. And when they see a technology that shows promise in a, targeting a very large disease state, which today really doesn't have any potential therapy, that certainly shows interest. And then, so I think that's the positive aspect, Diana, but maybe I think there's going to be a bit of a negative to all of this as well. And we know that during times where markets are bullish and investors are making a lot of money, everything gets funded. Good deal, good technologies, bad technologies, good management teams, bad management teams, everything gets funded. And I was having a discussion with a banker not too long ago who said, listen, the banks have said to us, our bankers have said, have you had good experience in managing, mergers into empty shells? Because if not, you need to be, because in the next 12 months, we might see a lot of technologies and companies that got funded, which actually won't succeed. And so you're going to have all these public companies now that are sort of in the empty shell space. I mean, for me, I say it tongue in cheek, and that sort of comforts me, because I believe for our company, the US public markets are where we need to be. And I'm not sure how much longer this window will stay open. So, very optimistic about where we've been today. Still a lot of money out there, but I don't know if next year we're going to be having the same discussion.
Well, we'll see. Imran, are you leveraging anyhow this window, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think largely what Lloyd's saying, I think, is agree with that as well. I think from our perspective, this is probably the first time in the last 12 to 18 months where our portfolio companies are thinking IPO before and /SPAC, but IPO SPAC, as opposed to trade sale acquisition sort of as the leading path, which is great to see. I think elements of that are, I hope, are here to stay as well. But I mean, the reality is, of course, that COVID has been, as Geoff was saying, has been good to us, right? Because as there's been an insane amount of cash that's been injected into the system, retail, travel, entertainment, all these sectors are suffering right now. People need to put that money somewhere, and they're putting it logically in healthcare. But to Anna's point of some of the companies that are getting funded and the valuations that they're getting funded at, those are not the sort of valuations that we would be comfortable with, which only suggests that we are probably going to do some things that we're going to regret in the future. But for the time being, I hope that this window is open. Our companies can go out there. I think it's important for us to execute and show investors that these companies can make money and can be positive. And if that's the case, then hopefully even after the window, hopefully it doesn't shut completely, right? Where even in a tougher market, the IPOs remain a possibility for Neurotech.
Yeah.
Imran, if I can ask a follow-up question, aside from IPO exits, obviously the opportunity to partner with a strategic healthcare company looms large, and I'm curious whether you or some of the other investment professionals on the panel have any insight into who might be some new players. Now, obviously, I talked about the big players, Boston Scientific and Medtronic and Abbott, and of course GSK has been active in funding bioelectronic medicine startups. What other big strategics who aren't yet in the game do you think are candidates for getting into the market, and whether they could represent a possible source of partnership or an exit down the road for Neurotech startups?
Well, I think if you look at a lot of the the big IT companies, from Facebook to Amazon to Apple, even to Microsoft, who are obviously active in the past week in this space, those companies are sitting on probably in excess of $1 trillion of cash in the bank, and they've shown different levels of interest in the broad healthcare space. You can see how some of these companies could be attracted to digital therapeutics, because it allows them to combine big data with healthcare innovation. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of these companies become more active in the sector into the foreseeable future. And I suppose in some senses, I'm surprised that they haven't moved a little bit quicker, given some of the soundings which have come from some of these large tech companies as well in the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd have gone with tech as well. I mean, I think that to me, the partnership aspect is important. When you think about Neurotech, even compared to drugs, right? Just the commercialization of these efforts is difficult to do, compared to, detailing a drug. Here, it's a very hands-on effort. So for small companies in the neurotech sector, it becomes difficult. So I envision or am optimistic about a future in which, to take, Neuroelectrics, for example, I'm not suggesting you do this, but, partnering with a pharmaceutical company that may be detailing a epilepsy drug, that then in their hands sort of becomes a tool that they can do as well. While, the tech side of it, which you have to really spend time with physicians and patients and help them explain how the technology works. That piece, like the startup with the Neurotech company, can work more with as well. And so I see that partnership opportunities with pharma, biotech, especially when we go into sectors that are classic drug markets. And I think that the data side of it, which, Daniel, that you're mentioning, which I completely agree with, and Google with their Verily side has certainly done a lot of that stuff as well. But I think the promise of data and how you can utilize that really pulls them in as well.
Okay. And Diana, you obviously have a good insight on the European market. What big European players in the medtech space or in the pharma space do you think are candidates for getting into this market?
Well, I can't see many that are not active yet. There's some players like Philips or Siemens that would, they've been interested in digital health, and it may at some point also lead to something that is more active as a product, although non-invasive, maybe even. But I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I have names for you.
You mentioned Philips. Now, this is a company that has invested in the past. In fact, they invested in the diagnostic space, bought a company called EGI, an Oregon-based company that was active, like Neuroelectrics, one of the early firms involved with high-density EEG recording and also TDCS stimulation. So Philips bought the company a few years back and then divested it last year. And I'm curious whether you or anyone else has some insight as to whether that's their indication that maybe the market isn't what they expected it to be, or whether that's just an anomaly. Anyone have any insight on Philips?
Sorry, maybe I can, just having also the European perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know so much about Philips, but it does, I'm going to echo a little bit here about what Diana said. It's true that in Europe, I would have expected to see more of the larger strategics take a more active role, or those that are sort of waiting in the wings. I haven't noticed that as much, but what I have noticed is a continued interest from Asian companies, mostly larger Chinese companies, looking to invest money. It's harder for them to do it in US technologies. So, they started kind of coming to Israel, and they've done a lot of sort of investment in Israeli companies and technologies. But now they're starting to migrate into Europe. And I'd say probably every couple of weeks, if I'm not exaggerating, we're either getting requests from large Chinese strategics or, maybe corporate arms, venture arms of large Chinese strategics who are looking to make investments here. So I don't know, Diana, if you've kind of noticed the same thing, but it's true that we haven't seen, the Medtronic size European companies sort of coming into the space and taking more of an active role.
Good point, Lloyd.
Oh, definitely not. Agree.
Yeah, I think that on EGI, I think that Philips, I think that what Imran was saying is so important to find the strategic fit. And we Neuroelectrics were in long discussions with a top world leader pharma company on epilepsy. And I totally agree with Imran. It makes total sense. They had the market access, the reimbursement, the regulatory, they have the connections with the neurologists. So it's a win-win for startups in the neurotech space and big players to partner for specific indications, right, on a commercial agreement. It didn't go for management reasons. That's the bad side of working with big companies, that they change management, and then if you're in the middle of a transaction, you lose it, right? But I think it made sense. I think that probably Philips and EGI was not probably the good win-win situation. And now it's Max team, which has taken over EGI, which I think is a much better fit, right? So we'll see how that goes. But I really, as an entrepreneur in Neurotech, I'm more in favor of deals with commercial agreements that not, acquisitions, at early stage. I think you really need to leverage your strengths, find the good partners. And I haven't found them in Europe as much as in the US. I have to say that some of the medtech big companies in the US are pretty open now to things that I haven't seen them open in the past. So they are open to neuromodulation. We are having conversations. I think it's a good moment for partnerships. So I would encourage, for those big players, and I would love to see that happening in Europe, but I haven't seen the energy that I have seen in the States.
I agree with Anna completely. We've had to chase the strategics here in the US, but once you make that connection, you have to really make them engage into what you have going on. They're very interested in your product, but they're very interested in following the data. So as we progress, we keep feeding them constantly more and more and more, information, more data, more proof of concept. And we begin to really distinguish ourselves within our niche on how we are the player. There's others trying to do what we can do, but it's using all of that to prove that maybe they can, but they're far away from where we need to be or where we are. So as long as you get out there, you connect with them, you differentiate yourself, you keep feeding them data, they're staying interested. And they will now call us to keep up to date. So that's a big change. You used to have to chase, you're not chasing anymore. Now they're coming this way, and that's always a very good sign.
And Geoff, is that because of, that's because of the data, the stage of the company, the team attention you can give to them? What's been more important to get their attention?
Yeah. Initially, it was just trying to get in and explain what you have, right? But now they understand the unmet medical need. They see how it fits into their strategic plan. So for us, it was making them, getting that awareness within them, how we exactly will fit to where they need to go. Medtronic wants to own the Neuro ICU. We explain to them directly and show them directly how we're a part of that strategic plan. Zoll wants to own the ambulance market. So, we have products which fit right into what Zoll needs to do. So we become part of that strategic plan, they follow it. But then you get a company like Stryker, which wants to own the ICU and they want to own the ambulance market. So certainly we keep feeding them as much data as we can about what we're trying to do so that, in the end, for myself, I'm creating the horse race today before I get, my FDA approval or, approval in other countries at the same time. So they need to grow. They know where the unmet medical need is. We need to keep filling them and informing them exactly what we can do and how we're, the player that they want to position with over time.
Okay, thank you. Well, just before we run out of time, there's maybe one other topic we need to touch, given, what's happening on the financial market size, which is the SPAC phenomena, and with the situation of several of these shell companies being going public and looking for targets, and our common understanding that somehow there is a source of scarcity of those targets, and several innovative companies in the audience and in the panel could eventually become one at some point, and it's an interesting situation where there's an excess of capital offer maybe. But the best position here to talk about it maybe is you, Geoff, with your view on current, Geoff C, with your view on current equity financial markets.
Thanks, Diana. So just some observations. So, and certainly some of you could attest to this, but as you know, GDP in the US is 18% healthcare. They've said that the past 6 months more has gone into the stock market than the past 10 years, and the funds need to invest their capital. So they're actively putting it to work. on the SPAC side, I'm just going to share a couple screens. It's been, I'll talk about SPACs and M&A, but it's been like a craze. I don't have a better description. So, you know, look at this, 248 SPACs complete. Last year, $83 billion. And this year, so far, I know it's the middle of April. You're up to 99 billion. Now, these get measured a little differently as far as getting filed for and getting executed. Just the other day, we saw Lumira DX jump into a SPAC at a 5 billion valuation. So start to finish will take 3 to 6 months, depending on what sector. And as we all know, healthcare has picked up in excess of the market capitalization, or as far as GDP goes. So that's 18+% in the US is pure healthcare. I can't tell you what's specific to Neurotech, but I can tell you a few fun facts. I mean, it's been a craze, and now we're seeing you know, chasing companies. I'm getting calls from SPACs. I'm getting calls from advisors to SPACs. You know, with you know, who do you know? What do you know out there?
Sorry to interrupt. Can you summarize what makes a company a good target for a SPAC? For those dedicated to the sector, of course.
There's been more on med tech than biotech. So mostly SPACs are looking for revenues, EBITDA, earnings, or they had been. Now you're seeing a little more interest earlier in clinical, phase 2s, phase 1s, phase 3s. So there's some money now chasing those areas. And we're seeing it across the board. We're seeing a lot in diagnostics and software with the value of prediction and some of the predictive analytics that are out there and some of the biomarkers that are out there with diagnostics. We're also seeing the public companies. I cover a few that have been on a virtual rampage of acquisitions. And I don't use that term lightly. You know, hundreds of millions raised. And these are not strategics. These are what you would define as micro cap, small cap, and smaller mid caps, billion caps, 5 billion caps, $500 million market caps. And, you know, I don't know if the targets are running out, but the money's still chasing them. You're seeing the bigger ones in the news. I think the smaller ones you don't see till they're up, and some of them are 10 people in a room, and some of them are a commercial business with $20 or $50 million of revenue, if not hundreds in some cases.
Well, interesting. Totally new situation. I don't think we have ever experienced anything similar.
Yeah, so we only have a couple minutes left. Is there anyone who wants to raise an issue that hasn't been raised yet that you think is important for neurotech startups looking for investment?
Well, being in that game, the thing that I found the good side of COVID is it's allowed us access to markets that previously wouldn't have gone to. I wouldn't have been at conferences in Europe. I wouldn't have been in India, all of that. But now I do. I'm getting access to many people within the European market. We've got investment coming in through India. We've got investment coming in through Greece. I wouldn't have thought that a year ago. We're getting a lot of attention on a global scale. And it's also allowed us to build our platform outside of the US now, rather than say, all right, well, we're going to start in the US and we're going to move to Europe and then we're going to go here. Already we're there. And that's been the big advantage of COVID for us. It just has gained us access to areas that before were just not conceivable. So, you know, to startups, my recommendation is you cast your net right now as wide as you can, because the opportunities are out there and they're big. So take advantage of what the world's like right now.
Thanks, Geoff. I think that's some great concluding advice. I think we're just about out of time, but I want to thank my partner, Diana Saraceni, for co-moderating this session, and thank each of the panelists. I think it's been a very informative and enlightening session. So thank you very much, and hope to see everyone hopefully in person at the next event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.